is keeping millions and millions of Uyghur people in the concentration camp. It's probably the most massive crime against humanity in the modern world. The policy of Chinese regime is ethnic cleansing of Uyghurs. It's religious cleansing of Uyghurs. It's the effort of totalitarian regime to establish full control over the lives and minds of millions and millions of people. It is absolutely unacceptable that such things happening. It's also absolutely unacceptable that the leading countries of the free world keep dealing with China economically, politically, culturally, militarily, ignoring this question. Ignoring the tragedy of Uyghur people is very dangerous for Uyghurs themselves, but it's also very dangerous for the future of the free world.
Good morning, everyone. That was a powerful message from Natan Sharansky calling us to reflect on why we are here. My name is Soraya Dean. Before we proceed, I have a question for New York. They call it rush hour here, but nothing is moving. Have you noticed that? So we are incredibly grateful to be here this morning, and I welcome each and every one of you, especially our speakers. The Elie Wiesel Foundation, in partnership with the World Uyghur Congress and the Uyghur Human Rights Project, for convening this largest ever NYC interfaith gathering devoted to publicizing the plight of the Uyghur people. I don't need to share with you statistics. You already know over 1.5 million Uyghurs are subjected to detention, forced labor, and cultural erasure. Yesterday, I went home with a heavy heart because myself and my colleagues, the Muslim women speakers, we are working in the trenches, addressing the rising anti-Semitism in this beautiful country. And I thought, now this is another pain and a sadness and a sorrow and a grievance that we have to put our effort equally and or more. Because anti-Semitism is that old hatred in new overalls, slowly wedged into issues of social justice. And that's what we are seeing on college campuses. So as a South Asian Muslim woman, let us not forget there are 620 million Muslims in South Asia. We need to raise our voices for anti-Semitism, for the genocide against the Uyghurs. We have a greater responsibility, which does not end with this conference, but it just begins with this conference. As a community organizer, I'm more interested in what will you do when you go home. So may I ask you to turn to the person next to you, behind you, in front of you, introduce yourself. Because when there's community and when there's solidarity, we are not victims. So please take a moment to get to know somebody that you have just barely seen but not spoken. And thank you. And my friends, let us not forget, what we need today is power. And power is organizing people. You and I alone, we can't do much, but we need people. Organizing people is getting to know people and then taking strategic action in solidarity. And Elie Wiesel reminds us in his own words, I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must always take sides, he said. No human race is superior. No religious faith is inferior. We believe the Holocaust taught us world lessons, but today, sadly, in our living memory, having heard and going through the egregious genocides and the obliteration of Jewish people that happened during the Holocaust, we are witnessing similar forces trying to bring down the Jewish nation and the Jewish people, and we will speak up. Because, thank you. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And let us not forget, we are gathered here to do work of cosmic proportions. So physically things may seem daunting, but we have other forces that will come to our aid as we proceed. And I want to remind you briefly the story of David and Goliath. How many of you know that story? No? Yeah, who thought that David had a slingshot? And I ask you, I urge you, and I remind you that we have to find our own slingshots. So I will not go further. I'm going to introduce our three panelists, speakers this morning. And it is a great honor and pleasure for me to introduce Elisha Wiesel. He's the chairman of the Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity. Elisha shares his father's message and continues his legacy by standing up for persecuted communities. In the last few years, he has spoken at the United Nations about the persecution of Uyghurs. Elisha is currently starting a hedge fund, rebooting the Elie Wiesel Foundation, chairing an Israeli startup in the fintech space, learning a little Talmud, he says, every day, volunteering as a ski patroller even though he rides a snowboard, and generally trying to be a good father, a good husband, and a good son. Please welcome Elisha Wiesel.
Assalamu alaikum. Shalom aleichem. Happy Wednesday. It's nice to see everybody here. This is a conference that has been so long in the making. I'm going to talk about, very briefly, 3 songs and a story. It sounds like that might be a 15-minute speech. I promise you, I'm very time conscious. It won't take that long. After my father passed in 2016, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, Ariel Berger, about what belonged on the canonical Elie Wiesel playlist. If we were to build a Spotify playlist, what would we put on it? And the first song that I felt very much had to be on there, because it spoke to the despair that one can feel, is the song by the Police, Message in a Bottle. For those of you who don't know it, I'll read you the first set of lyrics. Just a castaway, an island lost at sea, oh, another lonely day with no one here but me, oh. I don't want to torture you with my singing, but more loneliness than any man could bear, rescue me before I fall into despair. I'll send an SOS to the world. I hope that someone gets my message in a bottle. So that was the first song. The second song that I felt very strongly needed to be on there spoke a bit more to political activism, to speaking up and shaking people out of their comfort zone when they needed to be because something wrong was happening. And that song was one of my favorites growing up, Bonzo Goes to Bitburg by the Ramones, which is a classic song, and I can't sing it without heavy guitars playing behind me. But basically, it talks about Bonzo Goes to Bitburg. It's a reference to President Reagan thinking it was acceptable to put flowers down at the graves of SS in a cemetery in Bitburg, Germany, as part of the rapprochement between Helmut Kohl and the new West Germany and Ronald Reagan. And the song says, as I watched it on TV, somehow it really bothered me. I drank in all the bars in town to understand your foreign policy. It's a bit of a protest song, remembering a moment in time where my father was very brave and protested U.S. policy in a very uncomfortable position. But the third song that I now feel needs to be on there is something that I heard last night, a song I'd never heard before that was sung by our dear friend Rahima, called Achil, a Uyghur song which she sang for us. The flowers are about to bloom, soon we will decorate our hair. The flame of my love is burning and it blooms in the air. Please bloom. Without you, your bloom, how will we see the beauty? And that hope, I think, also belongs in the Elie Wiesel playlist. And it's one of the reasons that I'm so proud to get to know our Uyghur brothers and sisters more deeply, to learn about your culture, to learn about your values. I've spent some time in the months leading up to this conference reading from a book about Uyghur stories and Uyghur folklore. And I have to say that there's one thing that these stories often share in common with Hasidic stories, with Jewish stories, so many of which my father told on this very stage. And that observation is that the best of them are often the shortest. They say something important, they pack a punch, they don't need 1,000 words, they can get it done in 150 or 200. So with that, I want to tell you a brief story, if I can. It's a story about two peoples who lived at a great distance from each other. And these people had an attachment each to their land. They had nothing more than a desire than to raise their children with the values of hard work and creative energy and the right to reap the fruits of that work, of that creativity, who wanted nothing more than to live at peace with their neighbors and keep spreading on their traditions and values for generations. It's the story of two peoples who, even though separated by a great distance, were both confronted by those who didn't understand them and hated them, who were subjected to that first of all human sins, jealousy, for the things that these people were accomplishing. And it's a story of two people who were persecuted mercilessly for those traditions and values to the point where their very existence was in doubt. And through the acts of the storytellers and writers and scribes, these two tribes found each other. Through the work of translators, their stories and histories became available to each other. And as they got to know each other, these two peoples, these two tribes, began to see shared values, and they shared their suffering with each other. They shared their ideas on how to confront the persecution that faced them, and perhaps most importantly, they shared their hope. That is my vision today for what the Jewish community and the Uyghur community can accomplish together with so many other friends over the next 2 days. And it's my hope as well for our children and our children's children. Thank you all for being here with us today.
Thank you, Elisha Wiesel. So we're not here just to attend the conference, as I said before. Let us understand the importance of political activism. Our next speaker has done just that. When we go home, we have to do just that. We have to approach our congressional leaders. We have to mobilize our business leaders. We have to become more savvy in social media. Dolkun Issa is a political activist. He's a president of the World Uyghur Congress. He's a Uyghur activist based in Germany. He has been on a Chinese list of wanted terrorists since 2007, even though Dolkun has condemned all terrorist activities. He is the third and current president of the World Uyghur Congress. We know that later, because life became so impossible for him, that he went to Germany, Europe, and sought asylum there. In 2006, he became a citizen of Germany. Please welcome Dolkun Issa. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Dünyanın hem jaylarında bizni online bilen, internet bilen körüp atkan vatandaşlarım. Good morning, everyone who present here today and also watching us by virtually. Dear colleagues, dear friends, and distinguished guests, today we stand witness to a tragedy that challenge very essence of the humanity on ongoing genocide against the Uyghurs and other Turkic people in East Turkestan. In the face of such unspeakable atrocities, we are called upon to respond with unwavering solidarity, decisive actions. One of these actions is newly launched Congressional Uyghur Caucus in the U.S. Congress. Yesterday, with Congressman Chris Smith and the Congressman Tom Suozzi as a co-chairs by initiative by Campaign for Uyghur, and it is director, my longtime friend, Rushan Abbas. This has become 8th parliamentary Uyghurs group in the world. In recent years, we have achieved important milestones working with our partners. So far, 10 national parliaments plus European Parliament of the world have recognized Uyghur genocide, as well as United States government. The Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act has become the first law of its kind to prohibit the import of the Uyghur forced labor goods into the country. As the United Nations, we have seen great development in recent years. Over the 50 countries have condemned Chinese atrocity against Uyghurs. We have first UN report on the situation by the Office of the High Commissioner for the Human Rights, as well as by numerous street body and special reporter. During this process, some brave camp survivors play major role to accept this. Today, please join me in the recognizing the courage of 4 women who are standing up to all the truth in the face of great pleasure to stay silence. Zumrat Dawood, could you please stand up? Mirgul Tursun, Tursunay Ziyaudun, Gülzire Avuthan. Thank you for your tremendous work, and thank you for your brave actions. Today, our responsibility as the international community is heavy. The West, United States, play a huge role in enabling China to become its global economic superpower. By using US, Europe, and the Western technology, money, and research, today, Western dependence on China is a major threat to our democracy and value. Uyghur people's lives have become a simple command. With 25% of the global cotton being protected by Uyghur forced labor, you may want to ask yourself, I am contributing to the chain of the operations. The systematic operation, mass detention, forced labor, and the cultural erasure inflicted upon Uyghur population represented a grave violation of the human rights and dignity. It is a stain in our collective conscience that demands our attention and demands justice. But justice cannot be achieved in isolation. It requires unity, solidarity, and a shared commitment and upholding principles of human rights for all people, regardless of their ethnicity, religious, or background. I'm pleased to see many young people involved in human rights space today. Their young energy and dedication is commendable. I want to congratulate one of them today, my colleague, my sisters, and Director of Global Advocacy of the World Uyghur Congress, my sister Zumrat Ai, who is here today, just awarded Freedom of Worship award by the Roosevelt Foundation in Netherlands just 4 days ago for her work defending Uyghur rights. So, congratulations once again. Can you stand up? But our work is not just starting. We are gathering in New York for the next 2 days. Let us pledge to stand in solidarity with the Uyghur people. Let us amplify the voice, shine the light on their suffering, and demand accountability from those responsible for those heinous crimes. Our solidarity is not just a moral imperative, it is strategic necessity. By standing together, we send a clear message to the Beijing and its partner that world will not turn a blind eye to this atrocity, and the justice will ultimately prevail. I'm grateful for the Elie Wiesel Foundation for its support and the solidarity in the time of need. Thank you, dear friend Elisha and your excellent team. And I also want to thank my staff, my team, and the staff also Uyghur Human Rights Project for their hard work for over the past few months putting this conference together. In the face of darkness, let us be beacon of hope. Let us unite on solidarity with the Uyghur people. Together, let us build a future where such an atrocity are never again allowed to occur. Elie Wiesel says, "Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my face forever. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered by God and my soul and turned my dream into the ashes. I swore never to be silent whenever, whatever human being endures suffering and humiliations. We must always take sides." So yes, we should follow what the Elie Wiesel said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dalkan. 4 days ago, I was invited to a Seder in Los Angeles, and my friend Metal said to me, "Soraya, do you know a Uyghur?" So I quickly sent a message to my friend Elfida. Where is she? Yes, she and I took a class at Harvard with Professor Marshall Gans on community organizing, and she quickly found me a resource. And then Nurina came to the Seder, and she was sharing how she couldn't even attend her father's funeral, couldn't even acknowledge her father's funeral, because the Chinese Communist Party had confiscated the phones of her parents and she had no contact. That level of inhumanity is hard to grasp, isn't it? But it's happening because the world we are living in, 50% of the people who have nothing to say and who are evil are speaking up and doing things, and 50% of us who have so much to say and do, we are not speaking loud enough. So this conference may be a reminder that when we go home, we have more work to do. I met Omar Kanat in Taiwan. We had breakfast together. I'm not sure if you remember, you're a busy man. I was in Taiwan for the International Religious Freedom Summit. I am a co-chair of the Women's Working Group in DC. I'm coming from Sri Lanka. I'm a Sri Lankan American. And the Chinese Communist Party has its tentacles deep into Sri Lanka. And in talking with the youth in Taiwan, I realized what a grave threat this country poses to Taiwan. So what we do in raising the Uyghur issues will have ripple effects, because everything is connected. So let us not forget that the importance of our voice, our words, our hands, our head, and our heart. We need to use all of that today. Let me introduce Omar Kanat. Mr. Omar Kanat is Executive Director of the Uyghur Human Rights Project, a human rights research and advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. He has 2 decades of experience as a broadcast journalist. He holds a BA in history from Istanbul University's Faculty of Science and Literature with a focus on political history, and studied at the Munich Institute of Economics and Trade. Please welcome Mr. Omar Kanat.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. The Uyghur Human Rights Project is pleased to be partnering with the World Uyghur Congress and the Ali Wiesel Foundation for this interfaith gathering in support of Uyghurs. We Muslims have just celebrated Eid al-Fitr. We say Roseit in Uyghur, concluding a month of sacrifice and contemplation of our highest purpose as humans. Our Christian friends have just observed the Easter holiday, celebrating the triumph of life over death. Our Jewish friends are getting ready for Passover to celebrate the salvation of Jewish people from generations of slavery. It is the springtime in our calendar, and we truly take hope in the fact that we are coming together in New York. We thank each and every person here today for participating. We aim for action, so I thank you in advance for your creativity and your new ideas. We are counting on you to help us disrupt this ongoing genocide and to make sure the Chinese government's genocidal policies do not succeed in erasing the Uyghur people forever. It is truly an honor to partner with Ali Wiesel Foundation for Humanity. Ali Wiesel received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1986 for his unbounded humanitarianism. I can attest to just one example of how his action directly saved lives. Ali Wiesel visited Northwest Bosnia in 1992 and witnessed the inhuman treatment of Muslims and Croats at the hands of Bosnian Serbs. He pushed Serbian leaders to close the camps. When they did not, he wrote about it publicly in New York Times in February 1993, saying, "As far as Serbian authorities are concerned, I feel betrayed." He then appealed directly to President Clinton and was among the important voices, along with Representative Tom Lantos, another Holocaust survivor, who persuaded American government to step up. We are extremely grateful also to Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz and Dr. Mehnaz Afridi, who have been essential ambassadors for our gathering. They have been reaching out to people of all faiths and all political backgrounds to make our conference a true interfaith gathering. The Chinese government is carrying out a campaign to erase the Uyghur people not only in our homeland East Turkestan, but also across the borders. Uyghurs in exile are facing a constant campaign of harassment and threats. In fact, it is so serious that UHRP has published 11 reports documenting this transnational repression since 2011. Therefore, I hope that when we think of disrupting the Uyghur genocide, we also need to include strong actions to protect the civil rights and freedoms of Uyghurs everywhere, even here in the US. We have members of the Uyghur diaspora here from at least 6 states, including California, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey, as well as from Canada and UK and 5 countries in Europe. Their freedom of speech also needs champions like you. Today, Uyghurs can take great hope that our friends will never give up and will never stay silent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Omar Kanat. Before I hand over to the next panel, I would like to make a few closing comments about this panel. I hope it was enriching, and are we having any questions, Olivia? No? No questions, okay. So I want to thank also Dr. Mehnaz Afridi. Without her, I wouldn't be here today connecting with you all and understanding the deep pain and suffering that we have to address. You know, Elie Wiesel said, we will not be silent at human suffering. And Dr. King, I want to close with something that Dr. King said. He said, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. If you can't crawl, sit. And he said, for goodness sake, please don't do nothing. Thank you. And I'm going to invite the next panel, Never Again, the Uyghur Genocide and Learning from the Holocaust. Nadine Epstein, who is the CEO and editor-in-chief of The Moment magazine, she will lead this panel. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So there's so much going on in the world today. It's not just the war in Ukraine, which sadly was already raging when this conference was conceived, but now we have war in the Middle East. And these conflicts and others like them have drawn attention away from the plight of the Uyghur, and which makes it all more important that we're here today and that we can gather today and tomorrow and to confront this terrible crisis. Because as my friend and my mentor, Elie Wiesel, I'm going to paraphrase because I know he's going to be quoted constantly all day and tomorrow, we can't be indifferent and we can't be silent. So this panel, Never Again, the Uyghur Genocide and Learning from the Holocaust, is the first of many to come for the next few days. It's a very important one. Our esteemed speakers, and then I'll introduce them in a second. Maybe I'll have you introduce yourselves briefly. They're going to share lessons that have already and can continue to help frame the Uyghur genocide and lead to their survival, both in China and in the diaspora. And I come here because I'm the editor-in-chief of Moment, and Elie Wiesel and Label Fine founded it 50 years ago and it was a print magazine for the American Jewish community. Now it's a multi-platform community, and we still have a magazine. And in 2021, I worked with Tom Gelton, who's an NPR reporter, and we actually worked on this story called An Inconvenient Genocide, and it's available for all of you to read. I'm going to give you a link, and I have 1 or 2 copies, but it's a very important story about how, you know, the United States, basically Tom really dove into the history of the 1930s to explore why America failed to stand up to the Nazis then, and he showed how history was repeating itself. And so I will give you a link to it. It's momentmag.com/ an-inconvenient-genocide-Uyghur, Uyghur spelling. And it's an important story. And its title is, An Inconvenient Genocide, but the subtitle is, No One Came to Save the Jews. Is anyone going to help the Uyghurs? And that's what we're here to do today. So with that, I'm going to start with Ellen. Ellen, would you just introduce yourself really briefly? And then I'm going to have a question for you.
Good morning. I'm Ellen Germain. I'm with the U.S. State Department. I'm the Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues.
Thank you so much for being here. So how did the United States handle the refugee crisis when the Jews were trying to escape from Europe during the Holocaust? And what have we learned? And you have to be really brief because I know it's such a big question. But what did we learn from that?
Okay, yes, huge question. Very briefly, this was not a shining moment in the history of the State Department. In the early 1940s, the individual who was in charge of visas and immigration policy at the State Department, a gentleman named Breckinridge Long, did everything he could to block and obstruct help for Jews trying to flee Europe. He issued instructions to delay in issuing visas to people trying to get out of Europe. He lied to Congress about how many visas had actually been issued. He blocked or obstructed or just hid reports coming in from Europe from U.S. embassies that told the truth about what was happening in Europe. So, and there was, you know, huge anti-Semitism in the State Department, the government, the United States in general, a lot of anti-immigration, huge anti-immigrant feeling, and all of this contributed to the fact that the State Department, rather than helping, tried to hinder Jews who were trying to find refuge.
Briefly, I was going to ask you one question, though I forgot. What is the government doing better today? It's a really important part of this question.
So what I would say is we are trying. We try to learn from our history, right? We try to look back and say, one of the things we do is simply to acknowledge what I've just told you, to say, yeah, we did this, we didn't do this right, and let's try and do better today. So what are we doing? First of all, as some of the speakers in the previous panel said, we have to speak out, and we do. Secretary of State Blinken in 2021 said, yes, China is committing genocide against the Uyghurs. We have the Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocity Prevention Act that Congress passed in 2018 that requires, among other things, a report to Congress every year on what the State Department is doing to try to prevent atrocities. And that, among other things, talks about things like the United States has imposed sanctions and import restrictions to try to hold those, to try to respond to the Uyghur genocide. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we are trying to do better. We don't always get it right, but we persevere and we speak out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll be back to you soon. So Felice, could you introduce yourself really briefly? And then I want to actually ask you, I know you spent most of your career at the UN working to basically develop mechanisms at the UN fighting for the recognition of the Holocaust. And I want to know from you, really, how those lessons can be applied to the Uyghur.
I'm sorry?
How those lessons can be applied to the Uyghur.
Thank you very much. I'm director of AJC's Jacob Blaustein Institute for the Advancement of Human Rights. and first of all, thank you for inviting us to be here. It's an honor to be here. Our organization has worked to advance the protection and the prevention of individuals from genocide for decades. Your question is how the United Nations...
Well, basically, the Uyghurs can learn now. What can the Uyghurs learn now from the impacts and the purposes of remembrance and justice projects related to the Holocaust, though they may have begun years or decades after the defeat of the Nazis?
What we can learn is that perseverance matters. The United Nations is not known for leading on issues related to the treatment of Uyghurs, certainly not known for leading on issues related to human rights in China, for that matter. And what we have learned is that if we look at the way the Holocaust was treated, not unlike what Ambassador Germain was saying, there is a bad history here. The history is that for decades, the United Nations could not even utter the word Holocaust. It took until 1998, 50 years after the Genocide Convention itself was adopted, for the first Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, to speak about, to become the first Secretary General to address the term Holocaust, to call for an end to the Holocaust, to recognition of the Holocaust. And it was only after that that the engagement of enlightened members of his staff could bring forward enough information that gave them the comfort zone to start to speak about the Holocaust, to demand a special session, to demand a resolution, to actually create a separate program dealing with Holocaust remembrance and outreach. That continues to this day. But more than that, it brought about a resolution denouncing Holocaust denial. It brought about action to speak out, to condemn, to take action, and to normalize this kind of discussion. I can tell you that our organization has been outspoken in denouncing the Uyghur genocide, has been outspoken in demanding action and calling for United Nations human rights mechanisms like the High Commissioner, but many others, to speak out on the issue of the Uyghur genocide.
Can those mechanisms actually help the Uyghur, though? What can we do to help the Uyghur?
Excuse me?
Can those mechanisms help the Uyghur?
Absolutely, by publicizing the situation, by giving voice to the victims, by enabling individuals to present the information and hear it amplified through the voices of these globally respected entities. They bring attention, they bring normalization, they bring realization, and they can bring, as a result of that, government action, whether it's on issues of arbitrary detention, the extraordinary maltreatment of so many hundreds of thousands of individuals. The Race Discrimination Committee did this first, and they said there were almost 1 million. They were the first to give voice to that. That brought all of the world's attention to the situation in a way that didn't happen ever before. The High Commissioner visited. She didn't do a very good job, but her report does document what happened, and that too brought world attention in a new way. We'd like to see more. There are other rapporteurs, there are other mechanisms that can bring attention, and the attention then brings more attention to forced labor, to reproductive rights abuses, and to the separation of children. All these abuses are things that need to be better understood in order to enable us to focus our outrage, our our sense that this is unacceptable and governments must act to stop these actions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Danica, I'm going to ask you a question and then please introduce yourself as well. You're at the Holocaust Memorial Museum, and I'm wondering how the lessons and the legacy of the Holocaust affect your work in support of the Uyghur community in confronting mass atrocities. And what policy options do you believe exist for deterring further atrocities? And I know it's a big question, and all of us, each one of you could be up here, and I could just be interviewing you, so I apologize for being so short, but if you could answer briefly, and please intro yourself. Thank you.
Sure, thank you so much. First of all, I'd just like to thank the organizers for the invitation. It's such a privilege for me to be here. I'm Danica Dempo. I'm at the Simon Scott Center for the Prevention of Genocide at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC. We have worked on this issue for some time, and it's truly a privilege to be a part of this conference. So for the first part of the question, we're very fortunate to be based at the Holocaust Museum. The lessons from the history of the Holocaust have been instrumental in informing the study of atrocity prevention, and that includes being able to recognize early warnings and atrocity risk, as well as to be able to develop tools for how to mitigate atrocity risk and respond when atrocities are ongoing. But the other way that I wanted to mention that we've learned from our colleagues at the museum is that they have taken great care in centering the survivors of the Holocaust experience not only of personal loss, but of communal loss and a loss of cultural identity, and how to nurture that and bring that forward. And we've tried to take that ethos forward in the center in supporting the Uyghur diaspora community and survivor community, and making sure that their voices are at the center of policy discussions, and that their efforts at cultural preservation are also a part of that advocacy effort. Because as we've heard in the earlier panel, no one can better advocate for what needs to happen than the Uyghur survivor and Uyghur diaspora community. So our experience with Holocaust survivors has absolutely informed how we can best support the Uyghur community. But I did want to, as we move into policy options, also point out where the lessons of the Holocaust have been a bit of a stumbling block, though, for some who, if that's their first exposure to genocide, can sometimes make the mistake of thinking that all mass atrocities are going to look like that all mass atrocities are going to follow the same formula of mass extermination that we saw by the Nazis. And this can lead people to dismiss or miss really important signs. And as we know, the Chinese government's pattern and systems of repression against the Uyghur population do not follow the kinds of mass killing that we commonly see in recognized genocides. And this has caused some policy stumbling blocks, when in reality, we need to acknowledge the seriousness of these crimes and the multifaceted manner in which the Chinese government is systematically repressing the Uyghur population. And so our policy options should pay close attention to that multifaceted approach by the Chinese government. And if I may, a few of the areas that we still are pushing is we want the U.S. government to continue to support the protection of the Uyghur population as a singular policy priority, and not just as part of its larger geopolitical priorities with regard to China, but as a singular moral imperative and national security imperative, that Uyghurs deserve protection because they are important and not because China is important to the United States. And to pay attention, as I'm sure we'll hear from colleagues, to the importance of sanctions on private industry, tackling the forced labor aspect of this, and making sure that those sanctions are recalibrated so that they have the higher impact. We've been doing sanctions for a while. Let's make sure that they're actually delivering, protecting the Uyghur population. Outside of China, as we've heard earlier, they continue to be under threat, and yet they are the greatest asset in terms of advocacy and cultural preservation for their community. And lastly, the U.S. government needs to fully implement the acts that it already has, making sure that its Elie Wiesel Atrocity Prevention Act is actually going to be used for this, among other cases, and that its existing policy acts, including the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, are fully implemented. So I appreciate the question and the chance to be here, and for us, we still see a lot of policy options, despite the fact that we are dealing with an incredibly powerful and intransigent government in China. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So now I'm going to go to Nori, and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself too. But you are actually, we are here on the stage, a Uyghur refugee, and you're deeply involved in not just drawing attention to the genocide there, but also invested in the survival of the diaspora here. So I'm wondering, what does it mean for the Uyghur diaspora to be secondary survivors of an ongoing genocide? What are the traumatic and intergenerational effects of genocide survivorship when one's family has been locked up and put into forced labor or suffered or died in custody? And that's a big question, so if you can answer it briefly, I know, again, I apologize.
Thank you. Good morning. It's truly an honor to be on the stage with my esteemed colleagues in this panel. I've been coming to New York City since 1998. By far, this is the most impactful and powerful experience, specifically being at the exhibition last night, yesterday. I hope a similar exhibition can be displayed at the Holocaust Museum. I wanted to begin by thanking Alicia specifically, as somebody who's been going through, as you mentioned, as a Uyghur activist and now serving in the US government in a capacity as a commissioner being appointed by Congress. I am profoundly grateful for the Elie Wiesel Foundation for being a strong leader. I remember 3 years ago, Josh Rogan, who was in the audience, introduced us to Alicia. I could say that meeting paved the way for today's conference and the solidarity that Alicia and his incredible team has shown to us. Some of you may know that Alicia also had done something remarkable in early 2022 when we were campaigning to call the United States government to boycott the Genocide Olympics in Beijing. Alicia, Bernard Henry Levy, Natan Shurinsky, three of them bought pages-long advertisement in the New York Times twice called for boycott. And I don't have the data to prove, but based on the reports, the viewership, the NBC, CBC viewership as being the major broadcaster, sponsors of the Olympics, suffered tremendously. We're talking about half of their revenue drop. I brought this up because this kind of effort means a lot to the Uyghur community. The Uyghur community, including myself, even though I don't have a family member in the camp, I've been living and breathing with fellow Uyghurs here in the United States and around the world. During the process of writing my book, No Escape, I spent countless hours with the camp survivors sitting in the audience, and countless hours speaking to policy experts like Laura Murphy, and countless hours that I spent speaking with the policymakers, including the former Deputy National Security Advisor. So public support, governmental support, individual support is much needed.
Well, let me just stop you one second, because I'm going to ask you about some of these questions. So let me stick to the question we have, and I'm going to actually could you very briefly tell us what you think Uyghurs can learn now from all the projects that have remembrance projects, the justice projects that have been related to the Holocaust, even though some of these came about later? Are there some particular projects that Uyghurs can learn from? And I'm going to get to some of the other things you're bringing up soon.
Specifically, one word, survival skills. The ability to maintain culture and language. And we know that the Uyghur language and Uyghur culture has been targeted. Late Washington Post columnist Fred Hyatt wrote a very powerful piece in 2019 after UHRP released a report on the same topic, likening what the Uyghur people are going through to Kristallnacht. He said in China every day is Kristallnacht for the Uyghur people. So with that, the Jewish people survived the worst crimes committed against the ethno-religious group. And the Uyghurs have a lot to learn from their Jewish community, preserving the culture, preserving the communities around the world, the language specifically. The Uyghur language has been primarily targeted. I oftentimes when I meet with my friends, both Uyghur and non-Uyghur friends, the first, how are you? And I can't answer that question because I'm not well. This is very common to the Uyghur people. How can you be well when your people are going through mass atrocities on a broad daylight? So the survival skills and also the Jewish people's ability to rally support is something that Uyghur people also can learn.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very helpful. And I'll be back to you again.
Thank you.
Eric, I want you to introduce yourself as well. But maybe this will end up introducing you. You're obviously on New York City City Council, and I know you're deeply involved in Holocaust issues and in the city's public schools. And New York is a city of immigrants, and it's greeted many refugees and survivors from Nazi Germany and from all over the world. And I'm wondering what role cities such as New York and public schools can play in helping diaspora communities such as the Uyghur.
Well, first, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. You know, everyone here is from some national big organization, and I'm in New York City. So it really is special for me to be up here. And so I'm Eric Dinowitz. I'm a New York City councilman, as was mentioned. I chair the Jewish Caucus. I chair the New York City Council's new task force to combat hate, and I chair the Higher Education Committee. And just is anyone here a New York City public school teacher? If you could raise your hand. Okay.
Not one single person.
No, just me. I'm a former teacher, so I'm going to raise my hand. We have, I would say, a very serious structural problem in our education system. And I think everyone here knows that when you teach our students to hate, like in Nazi Germany, you have the divisions and the hatred. You're teaching children that it is okay at the base level to discriminate, and that as it gets up to commit genocide, as we see still going on today. And at its best, when a country comes together, like we did during the Cold War, and said, you know, we want our students to learn chemistry and trigonometry because we want to send a man to the moon, we do it. But right now, our schools in New York are still teaching the 1950s curriculum, as if our world is still the same, as if our understanding not just of science and math is the same, but our understanding of what's going on around us. And the reason I ask if anyone here is a teacher, because I think teachers would understand best. Maybe some of you experience this, maybe you have kids in school, or maybe you went to school. There's a fundamental question we have to ask when we're dealing with education policy is, what do we want our students to do, and how are we measuring it? Measuring it doesn't just have to be a high-stakes test, but I can get into that never for this audience. But we are really asking our students none of the important questions. We are not asking them to engage in current events. When we do ask them to engage in current events, we're barely asking them to analyze and research, because none of our assessments ask them to do that. And we're judging our students based on assessments like single high-stakes tests that don't measure those. We're judging our schools and our teachers and our principal based on those tests. As co-chair of the task force on hate crimes, we held our first roundtable yesterday. And it was a roundtable with high school students. And what they told us two very telling things. One was that I asked them to do the hand raise just like I asked you. I said, how many of you read the newspaper at least once a week? Just an article. Like a handful of them raised their... Well, I know you do. I'm telling you what I asked the students. I would hope all of you raise your hand. And then I asked, well, how many of you watch the news, like on TV? And then a few more raised their hand. And then I asked, how many of you are on social media, on TikTok, for example? And they all raised their hand. And all of them. And I don't need to make the connection for you between these companies, the economies, and especially TikTok, and censorship, and students not even knowing about an ongoing genocide. But what was interesting to me was the students said they want to be able to learn about media. They want to be able to have conversations about what's going on in the world, and they are not being taught how to do that. And so, from a local perspective, I think one of the critical things we need to do is to look at how we are assessing our students and how we are assessing our schools and what we are really asking them to do.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. So we've heard about education. We've heard a little bit about the Holocaust Memorial Museum. We've heard about the United States government. We've heard about what's happening at the UN. And I wanted to switch over back to Nuri and talk to you. I know you're an expert on corporations. And I'm wondering, like, you know, I know in the 1930s, one of the big obstacles were American corporations who were in bed with the Nazis. And today, I understand that American corporations are complicit. And I'm wondering what that means, and if you can tell us a little bit more about some of these companies and what we can do to make a difference in this way.
I've been advocating a strong policy in response to the modern-day slavery in China. Through my work, something that I realize is that the government is not going to be able to solve this problem. The businesses must take an action. I make a living being a compliance lawyer. I write policies for the companies. The existing laws are insufficient to address this modern-day slavery. The Congress mandated the companies to eradicate or come clean with their exports to the United States, but there are certain loopholes has not been closed yet. Europe, for example, becoming a dumping ground. I love the posters yesterday calling it Italy out for continuing to import tomatoes made with the Uyghur slave labor. So naming, shaming the businesses publicly did not yield the type of result that we wanted. So I think we need to do two things. One, to enhance the existing laws, specifically the UFLPA, close the loopholes.
Could you tell us what is that?
Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act.
Thank you.
And then two, using the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act as a model to add criminal consequences to either existing law or make a new law. Last spring, I testified before the CCP Select Committee, and this was one of the recommendations. Unless you call the corporations to account through law enforcement and adding legal criminal consequences to the administrative consequences, it will be very difficult to convince the corporate leadership, corporate executives to do the right thing. And if you see in today's U.S.-China relations, the corporate leaders have a better reception in Beijing than our top diplomats. That is very telling. So this has to be done governmentally, individually, and also through multinational corporations around the world. So that's one thing that I think we need to look into, continue pushing.
Great, thank you. So I'm wondering if I'm going to go through all of you one more time, and I'll start with Alan. I'm just wondering, is there one next step that you think that the government could take?
As I think we've heard and discussed, it feels like it's never enough. Big part of what we're doing is continuing to implement more strictly and more probably the things like the Forced Labor Prevention Act. DHS has already denied hundreds of shipments, is holding thousands more, and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of goods that were are alleged to have been produced by forced labor. Mm-hmm. These are things that do have actual impact, and the more we can do that, the better it is. State Department also is training diplomats to try to identify potential atrocities. It's atrocity prevention, identify things like that can lead to crimes against humanity and mass atrocities, because one of the things I think we learned from studying the Holocaust is that genocide is a process. It's not inevitable. It goes, bit by bit by bit. And if we can ameliorate or even stop it at any point in the process, we have done something good. So identifying election violence to try to prevent it, that's an indicator. Trying to prevent radicalization and recruitment of terrorist groups, another potential indicator of atrocity. So we're trying to train our diplomats and our personnel overseas to identify and at least report back on this, so that then policymakers and others, civil society, all of us, can then try and take some action.
Thank you. Thank you. Danica, and I'm wondering what you think is the next step. It could be for the Holocaust Memorial Museum, but in any way, shape, or form.
Sure, so thank you. The museum and the center in particular recently held an event and are supporting potentially doing additional events around a video. We brought speakers. We've testified to Congress in the past. I think for us, it's a combination of making sure that we're able to give platforms to the Uyghur diaspora and speakers in DC, making sure that this continues to be our conversations with interlocutors in the policy space in DC. And whenever we do raise atrocity and genocide prevention, that this is one of the cases that we raise. But to bring back to the point about private industry and next steps, I do think there is, and one of the huge values of this conference is to evaluate how do we change what's not working, and making sure that the priority from the policy side is actually changing this, making sure that what's being done and the steps that are being taken are not just to make sure that the U.S. is in the clear in some way, but are actually going to have an impact and are going to be a deterrent for perpetrators. So from our perspective, it's about assisting the diaspora community, survivor communities in their memorialization and their advocacy efforts, and thinking about how we can continue to push for a refinement of policy in the policy space in DC that actually continues to match what's happening and tries to make a substantial and tangible impact.
Thank you. Thank you. Eric, do you have a brief thought on what might be a good next step in schools today, an education system?
Many, but I just want to share. I remember Omer when he was just speaking about it was just a happy Passover, and mentioned it's a story of redemption, and that's true. But I'm also guided by the value that's taught during Passover. It isn't just a story of redemption, it is a story of empathy. Because what we say on Passover is, this is what God did for me. And we place ourselves as if we were there those thousands of years ago, and we are redeemed and set free from bondage. And that's the value I'm conveying to my colleagues as chair of the Jewish caucus. And just this week, we had the first ever city council model Seder where we had Holocaust survivors. And to have Jewish and non-Jewish council members in the same room with 70 Holocaust survivors, with them sharing stories and sharing the values, it's not just, as we keep saying, I think, not just about the Holocaust, it's the lessons learned and how we can look forward. And if there's one thing, I think, bringing everyone together and asking, again, if it's the schools, asking our children to do the same, asking our school system to value and to provide credit and whatever else schools give out to the students and the teachers who engage in that empathetic work, because we're not going to solve these really critical problems of genocide if we can't feel the pain that others are feeling.
Thank you. So true. Thank you. Felice, what do you think is the next step for, a wise next step?
Well, as Eric and others have said, the key understanding we have from the Holocaust and the experience with advocacy on this issue is that it was not Jews alone who brought about this attention. Mm-hmm. That Jews built coalitions, that Jews found advocates, found colleagues and others. And so similarly, we say to our Uyghur friends, we are your colleagues and friends, and you can look to us for this same kind of support, that together we can act, find courageous leaders who will speak out, speak together, work together, and bring about awareness, change, and a different future. We want to be sure that the destruction of the Uyghur people is acknowledged, mourned, rejected, and finally brought to an end.
Thank you. So, Nori, I'm going to end with you, and I'm wondering, there's so many next steps, but is there one in particular that strikes you as worth mentioning and discussing today?
Thank you very much. I will say that the Uyghur organizations, specifically the two co-host organizations, need a lot of help, financial, individual support, so that they can carry on the important work using a street language they've been drinking from the fire hose. So much work to do with very limited resources. And I ask you to go to specifically uhrp.org/donate to sign up a monthly pledge that will help to engage in with governments around the world to push policy initiatives and also conduct human rights research and documentation. Going back to the earlier question, documentation is very important. This genocide is still underway. Some point calling it genocide is just a step number one. That's what the state party to the Genocide Convention is obliged to do. It's their treaty obligation. But the real action to stop and punish. So in order to take it to the next level, we need to start documenting. And UHRP and the World Uyghur Congress are well positioned to carry out that responsibility. In order to do that, they need a lot of support from you.
Thank you. I want to give them all some applause because I know I've been cutting them off a little bit, and they've all said such amazing things. So let's give them all some applause. Thank you. I just wanted to add one thing, that I do think that as Passover is coming up this year for Jews, that it'd be wonderful if all of us who are having seders could invite Uyghurs to come to be part of it, or certainly talk about the Uyghur genocide. I think there's so many people who are just not aware. There's so much going on in the world, and our conversations today are in context of all that, and people aren't really thinking about the Uyghurs, and so remembering them this year at seders is a really important step that we can take. I don't know if are we allowed to have questions, or I don't remember. Are we doing questions at all from the audience or not?
We've agreed that we can have written questions.
Oh, is there anyone? Well, we could take, I think, one or two questions if people want to raise their hands and really ask a question, perhaps, and maybe not as much of a comment would be lovely. Okay, please call on him. Does he have, why don't you come on up? We'll give you a mic. Thank you.
Number 8 is on. Yes, please. Thank you. That was a really insightful panel. I have 3 small questions.
Wait, how many questions? A lot of questions. Okay.
Mr. Main, I really appreciated how you handled the State Department, some of the ingrained culture. Is the State Department currently doing enough to process Uyghur visas, especially for asylum seekers? There's several dozen Uyghurs who are stuck in detention in Thailand. Is the U.S. State Department doing enough? I know that's somewhat outside of your normal responsibility. Ms. Templo, thank you for what you said about what the U.S. government can do. Can the Holocaust Museum have a Uyghur exhibit? I know that there is a space that has been used for other non-Jewish Holocaust atrocities, and that would be a wonderful space. And then finally, Felice, it's great to see you. 2 years ago, there was a resolution in the UN that failed by 2 votes. The US and the other sponsors seem to be half-hearted in pushing for it, even though they introduced it. Is it too late to try for another one?
I guess just start.
Okay, I would. Thank you very much for the question. I think the short answer is we are probably never doing enough. It's not a great answer for you, but we are doing everything that we can. It's something that we take really seriously. We know, obviously, the situation of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang and elsewhere, and we are trying to process refugees, visa requests, applications as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But I acknowledge that it's not, it's never enough.
And thank you for the question and the interest in having a space in the museum. We do, as you say, have an exhibition that is currently called Burma's Path to Genocide, which is highlighting the genocide of the Rohingya people. That exhibition was several years in the making, and is the decision to change out that space is a longer process. There is no indication that that would change at the moment. So I think for our part, because the spaces they don't change very often, and the reason we think that exhibition is as powerful as it is because we did take a long time to make sure, working with Rohingya, working with other communities, to make sure it is exactly what they need. And if we were to do a similar space, we would want to take the same amount of time. So that's not to say it would never happen. It's to say that that process would be multiple years in the making. So it is something, and we get requests like this a lot. And so we, appreciate that the space continues to have the gravity that it does. Which is why we tend to hold events at the Holocaust Museum that highlight these issues. Our recent event on the Uyghurs and bringing Uyghur speakers and Holocaust survivors into the same space, as mentioned, is a powerful opportunity to highlight shared experiences and different experiences. So long story short, there's no current process for that. Doesn't preclude a future one. But for those of us working on these issues, what we're trying to do at the moment is make sure that we make the best use of the spaces that are available at the museum to highlight this. And I will say, when we do bring people through Burma's Path to Genocide, we do use it as an opportunity to point out that there are a lot of countries that are where there are mass atrocities that are happening, where there are genocides that are happening that people may not be well aware of. It is a way to introduce people to contemporary genocides. So our plan is more to use other spaces that are more readily available, and also to do events on the Hill and other things like that, using the gravity and the resources we have at the museum. But it doesn't preclude use of the space, but there's no current plan to use the space for any other context, and that would be multiple years in the making to do justice to what it would need to be. But I do appreciate the question, and we will continue to take note when we do get that request.
Felice? Thank you, Rana, for those questions. If there's one message that I hope I've conveyed today, it's that it's never too late to bring these issues forward, to demand attention to them, remembrance, and action. What does it take? It doesn't happen by itself. People aren't going to suddenly show up in the middle, any more than they would show up in the middle of a meeting of Congress and say, here's a new law adopted today. It takes planning, it takes courage, it takes working to find the people who are not just sympathetic, but who understand the issues, committed to them, and who will take action. And that takes time, it takes leadership, it takes coalitions, it takes working together. That's why we're here today.
Thank you. Those were all great questions, by the way. Thank you. I think that I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank our speakers today. I'd love to hear more from you. Each one of you had so much to say. And I want to thank all of you, and I want to thank Alicia, and I want to thank the World Uyghur Congress and the Uyghur Human Rights Council for bringing us all together today for these important conversations.
Thank you very much, Nadine. Thank you to the panelists. I'm giving people two choices now in our schedule. You can take a stretch break right where you are, chat here, and if you must, we will have coffee available, but you can't bring your coffee back in, so it's not another full meal. We won't have time. We hope to see everyone back here promptly at 10:45 for the next panel on forced labor when cameras will be off, and I'll remind you again. Thank you, everyone.
Sorry to speak from here.
It's okay. I know the rivalries never stop. You might have preferred Hunter, but not everyone feels it. It's all right.
But you take care of your own thing, and I'll take care of your panel.
That's where I represent. I do.